Just see now.
Like the pose for your glamour shot?
It's long, it's long, it's long. Okay. Great. Thank you for putting up with that.
Okay, ready?
It's us on that.
But Meg, I can hear it coming through some sort of speaker.
Okay, we're gonna start. Ready for coming? This is for Monster, where you are. We're web development and design. And today we're really excited to have Chris Plummer speaking. I just wanted to cover a few logistical things, such as location. There's one in the back. There's one on the first floor as well. I'm sure you all saw the pizza and beer and wine sponsored by Vermonster. Thank you for bringing one wine. Yeah, I think that's it.
Afterwards, we're going to stick around for a little bit and hang out and talk.
Thank you, Chris.
The microphone's working? Great.
Nice.
All right. Thanks for Monster, and thanks Amanda and Meg for hosting this event. So my name is Christopher Plummer. I am a developer at a company called Upstatement. Here's my contact info, and we'll share this afterwards. So if you guys want to talk, come see me or download my slides. So I work at Upstatement. We're a design and engineering consultancy in Boston, and we do things like this. We make web applications and progressive web apps and websites for a variety of clients. So what is a progressive web application, right? Many of you may not have heard this term. And some people might have sort of this natural first reaction, like there's no such thing as a web app. There's only websites. I've heard this before. And I think that's true to some extent, right? Like things we might think of as a web app are really made of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So maybe there is no such thing as a web app. Maybe it's all just websites. Maybe there is no kind of like binary between the two. Maybe it's sort of a spectrum. So if we can think about the things we build on this spectrum, we can look at things sort of that are very website-y on the left, right? They're very sort of static. There's not much you can do. I gave the example here of Zombo.com.
Welcome to Zombo.com. This is Zombo.com.
There's like not much you can do at Zombo.com. I mean, you can do anything at Zombo.com. Your imagination is the only way. So that is Zombo.com. So all the way on the left, there's not much you can do. And as you kind of move up the spectrum, you get into more interactivity, right? With bostonglobe.com, maybe you can sign up for a newsletter. Maybe you can interact in some sort of scrolly way with things that are going on. And then when you get up to the level of Twitch, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with SaltyBet. But SaltyBet is this really interesting like Twitch application. People are, you can't see it because there's an ad unfortunately right now, but people are talking to each other and they're betting on these two bots that are playing this fighting game in the background. And you can see like a leaderboard of who's winning and how much money has been bet. Like $1.4 million has been bet on Super Vegeta EX3. Hopefully this ad will go away shortly. And then there's another ad. Great. So there would be an awesome two computers fighting there. But you can see here that like this is a big step from Zombo.com. Like, there's a lot of interactivity. So like we can do that stuff on the web. We could call those things on the right like maybe but what about applications, native and desktop, don't we get everything that's on the right with a desktop application? And you sure do. You get a lot of things with a desktop or native application, right? They're fast, they're reliable, they're engaging, and importantly, they have access to hardware, which we can't really do on the web. So native apps can get us a lot. You know, are they fast? I don't know. Are they reliable? Maybe if they're really simple, but not if you don't have a network connection or you have a lot of latency. They're not going to be reliable. Well, you can kind of like read content, and maybe you can do some web appy stuff, so maybe they become really engaging. Do they have access to hardware? Certainly not, like hardly ever, unless they're really tied into the browser. We've got this new thing, this idea of building a progressive web app that maybe like bridges that gap between web application, site, or web app. Build things for the web as web apps that are fast, reliable, engaging, and they could even have access to hardware. Like this is the goal. This is what we want, right? And so there's this idea that we have progressive web apps, and they could finally fulfill this like long-held goal of creating cross-platform applications. We could leverage this like huge distributed, dynamic, and open application runtime environment called the web browser. The web browser is no longer just a document viewer, right? It's a place where you can make actual software. And so when we talk about progressive web applications, find them in terms of a few things. Their goals, right? Progressive web applications aim to be reliable, performant, and engaging. So what do we mean by each of these things? Well, when we talk about reliability, let me make that bigger for everybody. We talk about making a progressive web app that's reliable. We want to make something that could work online or offline, just like a desktop or native application. We want to solve this problem of something called Wi-Fi. If you're ever out in the real world and you take out your phone and it shows like 5 bars and then you try and do something and you can't do anything, right? It's not Wi-Fi, it's Wi-Fi. Because it's lying to you, get it? So we also want to make them secure. So the web has like a reputation, a well-earned reputation for being insecure. And maybe there's nothing more secure than like a Microsoft Word document that's on your hard drive and can never get out into the real world. Next goal that we want to achieve here is performance, right? We want these things to load fast the first time, and we want them to load instantly the second time. When you take out your phone, little icon, and you start the thing up, it loads like that, your native application. Website, you gotta wait for the network usually. Another goal is to have like no big major downloads. And this speaks to the fast first load thing. So when you install a native application on your phone, you probably have to sit there for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 minutes waiting for it to download 5 megabytes, 50 megabytes. I've seen your phone that are 500 megabytes. That counts. Like that counts in your load time. On the web, we can work to remove that, and we can do that through like aggressive preloading things before users need them. We're already doing this one right here, right? Like we're already responsibly loading assets, so we're only loading like the images that we need. So hopefully we've achieved that goal. And we can also use some new server-side technology to like push things out faster. And when I talk about engagement, I talk about these things and more. It needs to be real time. So the cool thing about like Twitch, right, is that it's live. You can play Pokemon with 1 million people around the world in real time. And as you're sitting there typing in the keys and pounding them and trying to get the little guy to move to the left, because you keep typing left, it's you're competing with a bunch of people all over the world. And that's really cool. We also want these applications to have first-class status, right? We don't want, when you take out your phone and you hit the button for a native app, it just takes over your whole screen. Application history. We want that for the web too. We don't want to like have a bookmark, right? That you click a bookmark and it opens the site in a browser and it's surrounded by the browser. It's not really engaging in that sense. It doesn't feel like an app. So we want to be able to add these things to our home screen as icons. You know, we want them to live in like your normal applications directory, not in some special bookmark place. And we want them to, like, in the case of Windows, you want them to sit inside those little Metro boxes and such. And that's something Microsoft's working on right now. Other forms of engagement, push notifications, and of course, access to hardware, which we are slowly working our way up to. So being able to get at Bluetooth is now a thing with web Bluetooth, and same with geolocation and camera. Okay, so if those are the goals, if we can define a progressive web app in terms of those goals, performance, engagement, and reliability, like how do we make those things happen? And here's 3 things that we can use. And there's more, but let's start with these. So HTTPS or SSL is one, service workers, and creating an app manifest. And if anybody's into drinking games, every time I say service workers, take a drink, because that's going to come up a lot. Cool. So we'll start with the easy one, the one that's kind of should be a given, and we should be taking for granted, right? Using HTTPS. Essentially, HTTPS is required for service workers to work, and I'll talk about what service workers are a little later. But it's required for service workers and other browser features. So the browser vendors are working on making sure that you start serving your sites on HTTPS, because Google and Microsoft and others have a goal that by 2020, all websites will be served on HTTPS. HTTP will no longer be a thing. And I think that's a really great goal because it protects your users and makes your sites much more secure. It's essentially table stakes. Like, don't come to the party if you're not going to serve HTTPS. And they're starting to enforce this by rolling back browser features and saying, like, you can't use app cache or you can't use service workers unless you're serving HTTPS. And then, of course, there's HTTP2, which is a server-side specification, and you can serve files faster, right? So we talked about fast load, instant second load, so that fast first load can be achieved largely in part due to HTTP2, to a situation where the browser requests HTML, right? It just gets HTML, and then it starts parsing it, and it says, oh, now I need JavaScript. I'm going to go fetch that. I need an image. I'll go fetch that. I need CSS. I better get that. And it kind of, it fetches sort of in sequence, and it can batch up to 6 at once. P2 allows the server to push things to the client. So when the client says, I want index.html, the server says, I know if you want index.html, you're also going to want CSS, like with index.html. You don't have to wait. So you're going to reduce round trips, and you're going to get a faster, instant first page load, hopefully, which is cool. So you do that, you do SSL, you do HTTP2, and you've unlocked performance and reliability. This is the big one. What is a service worker? So a service worker is a script that can run in the background, and it can execute tasks on behalf. Right? Like intercepting network requests and pre-caching assets and things like that. But the important thing is that the service worker runs in the background. You don't have to be on this website for the service worker to work. It's up to the operating system and to the browser when the service worker is activated. So this is JavaScript that runs in the background. I can close this thing here, and it might still respond to events that are happening in the world. Cool, that's very powerful, right? So how do they work? Well, they've got these lifecycle hooks. If you're familiar with front-end frameworks, and you might be familiar with React or Ember or Vue, something like that, there's a series of lifecycle hooks for a service worker where it'll do things when it's installed, it'll do things when it's activated, it'll do things on error, and you can tell it what to do in those instances. It's reactive and event-based. So it can sit there and it can listen for events to happen. It can react to that and do something. So it can listen for messages, and when it sees a message coming through, almost like you're listening to a DOM element for like changes, or you're listening for events to be emitted by the DOM, a service worker can listen to other kinds of events. A message coming through, like a message for a push notification, it can say, I'm going to take that message and I'm going to respond to it in some way. I'll do something with it. And I'll show you how that works in a bit. But this is the big one. And the big new thing, fetch. Whoa, sorry. Sometimes they get a little, though I'm doing this in Vim, which is like a really weird way to do a presentation. It's a heck of a lot faster than making a bunch of pretty slides. So fetch is a new browser API that lets us do a few things. One is it can be sort of like it's a way of getting assets from a server and making requests, similar to like XHR, or something like an AJAX. So you can call fetch in that way. But importantly, you can listen for fetch. And so when you combine that listening for events with a service worker, it allows you to like do some really interesting things. The service worker can be listening for a fetch event, and then it can do something with that. In this case, maybe you want to take that fetch event, see if you've already got that data somewhere. And use the data that you have like cached somewhere instead of making the network request. So service worker can sit there and it can listen for all network requests. You got to get an image. Service worker intercepts that request for the image. It says, this guy wants an image at this URL. I'm going to see if I've already got it before we go off to the network. And I'll show you how that works. But it's really cool because you can essentially inject an entire like set of middleware in between the server, or in between the server and the client, right? You can have a client-side proxy for everything. You can cache assets. You can preload pages. You can like manipulate your caches directly and decide what you want to do with the caches. You're not like what the browser does by default with caches. And the big one, line 437, you can cache HTML, right? We've never been able to do that. You've never been able to cache HTML. So you could imagine like what that means if you can cache HTML. The network to get HTML for a website, that means if you're not on the network, you can still see the website. Nothing else. If you start doing that, that's like the first thing you can do to start making a progressive web app. What that looks like. So here's Pokédex. So Pokédex is a progressive web app. It uses service workers to cache assets and cache HTML. So if I refresh this page, it loaded. You didn't see it because it was so fast, but it's loading in the background. I could do something else cool. So in my like Chrome inspector over here, I hope people can see this. Yeah. Offline button for testing. I can take this whole thing offline and hit refresh. I'm not on the internet. Now I'd actually shut off Wi-Fi on my computer and demo this, but then like the whole screen share would break down and nobody could be able to see that. So what's going on here is like we're refreshing a page and it has no problem. We can look at like the network tab and see what's going on. So if we look at the network tab here, so we're requesting Pokédex.org, right? We send the request, and if we look at size here, it says it's responding with from service worker rather than from anywhere else. You might get some other things from memory, but it gets HTML from the service worker. That's why it can work offline, because it never has to request HTML from the network. Very cool. Also cool about this, you'll notice that response time is crazy fast, like 14 milliseconds. Has anybody ever been able to get HTML, even from like the most basic thing at 14 milliseconds? HTML requests, you can speed up your site instantly from maybe 250 milliseconds, maybe 75 milliseconds down to 14. That's pretty cool. So great, our website like now has an offline mode. We can use our sites without being on the internet. And what's cool is like you could write a service worker that would know that it's on a network. And whenever it's on the network, it can fetch new data, new assets. And then when it's off, it can sit there and give you stuff in the cache. And when it connects again, it can update everything. So if you've been working, I don't know if anybody uses Trello around here. Trello has like a, yeah. You ever like work for 30 minutes in Trello and realize that it was disconnected and there's the little thing in the corner that's like, oh, you disconnected. And you're like, shit, I lost 30 minutes of work. We can solve that problem. We can just have the service worker wait till you're connected again and like send that data through in the background. So yeah, I can show you a little bit of the code for that, for how this works. So, I have the most over-engineered portfolio page, I think, of anybody ever. Just to play with service workers, I was like, how far can I push this idea? So my portfolio page is a progressive web app right now. You know, we can open up the application tab, we can take it offline, we can hit refresh, and it still works. Although you'll notice that it is attempting to make network requests and fails. Request, the site still appears. So that's cool. I'll show you what that looks like in code. One little JavaScript file. This is vanilla.js, no frameworks necessary, right? When the document loads, when we've got a ready state, we're just going to initialize a service worker. It's just a function I wrote, and all that function does is this, business. Wish I were taller. So the first thing we do on line 14 up there is we're going to check if the service worker exists in the navigator. I maybe skipped this because I don't have presenter notes, but the progressive in progressive web app means that we're going to add these things to browsers that use them. This is the progressive enhancement idea, right? So if we have a service worker in the navigator, like, what the heck? Let's use it. Let's load that service worker. You register, like, there it is. Pro tip, always put it on .root. Guys at Google taught me. And I trust them because they wrote the code for this. If we don't have it, like, maybe we just log service worker not supported or don't log anything at all. Doesn't matter. So we're just going to call this cool like service worker register function. And then I'll show you the code for the service worker. So when the browser sees that, it'll load the code and it will, Yep. And so this is what a service worker looks like. It's just JavaScript, plain old JavaScript. I'm giving the cache a name. It's helpful to name your caches so you can do things with them later. Otherwise, the service worker will generate like an automatic cache name. And let's just skip down here to add an event listener. So service worker has this like interesting API. It doesn't use the word this. You might be familiar with like the word this being on the left side of everything. Service workers just use the word self, and self refers to the service worker instance. And so on install, we're just going to run this like install service worker event. All that does is it calls install service worker, log that it's installing, and then we do this like weird event.waitUntil business. And all that says is like, hey, we're going to do this event, but we're going to wait until you do this other thing to finish executing this install event. And so what is it waiting for in this case? It's waiting for cache app shell. And all cache app shell does is it opens up the caches for this site. And then it adds all the files that I told it to cache. So I told it to cache these files, this little array of files. So it opens the caches and it caches those. Cool, that's what it does when it installs. So the moment it installs, it's going to cache a bunch of things for us. Caching index.html and whatever's at. And then we're also like going to cache CSS and JavaScript, right? Like we know that's going to come through and come in handy. Most of your sites are using that. So the next thing is there's an activate event that happens. I won't go too much into that because it's not really interesting. It's just doing this business of like clearing an old cache and then making sure that the cache is activated with this funky self-client's claim line. But I'll show you where fetch comes in. So I talked about this fetch API, right? Tell the service worker to add an event listener to fetch. And whenever it sees fetch, it's going to do something. In this case, it's going to call this handler. So it's going to take that fetch event. I'm logging it. I'm saying like, hey, what are we trying to fetch? And then we're going to tell that event to respond with something that I might find in the cache, passing in the event. All right, so what's maybe load from cache? It's just a function. It looks in the cache, and it attempts to match in the cache that fetch for. It's going to come up with a request, event request URL, right? We're just going to check for that request in the cache. And if we find that request in the cache, hey, then we'll return. That's cool. Otherwise, like, just forward the fetch. Just call fetch and just send the request on. And so we've essentially, with this one function, we've injected a little bit of middleware to see if the cache has the thing we want, and we'll use it, or we'll just forward the request to the network. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty naive, though. Like, it's a really naive implementation of a service worker. And it's naive because those caches last forever, right? Like, we just said, like, hey, I want you to cache everything. So, like, 3 years from now, if somebody visits the site, they will still get the same cache. So that's no good. So you have to adopt better caching strategies. Cache everything and just serve from the cache. I think I have, oh boy, it goes up to 4. I'll just go straight there. But I think in this example, I've done what everybody should do, unless you want to get into writing your own like caching library. Use a pre-existing library. In this case, we're using something called Service Worker Toolbox, which is a library written by Google. And they just provide like an abstraction, useful abstraction for caching things. And then you can do things like define the max age, or you can tell it how to cache things. In this case, we're doing 2 different things. If we request anything from home, cache first, and I'll respond to the cache first, but I'll also look at the network. And I'll update the cache based on the network request. And then we'll just expire the cache if at the end of a month. In this case, we're using a different function that's provided by this toolbox, where we're just going to go for the fastest thing. And the network at the same time, and whichever responds fastest, it will take that and serve that up, which is almost always the cache. But the nice thing is, since it's requesting both, cache returns first, the network request will still come through and it will update the cache. So if you ever get into doing this kind of stuff, I highly recommend using a library that provides a lot of abstractions for you. Cool. So what else can service workers do? They can handle push notifications. So instead of listening for a fetch event, you can listen for a message event. And then you can take information from that and display a push notification to a user, like a bona fide push notification. And earlier today, I did this with weather.com, which is a progressive web app now. And they do push notifications for like tornadoes in your area. Super useful if you're in like tornado country. And I clicked this little button, and it sent me a push notification saying, like, hey, you just signed up for notifications. I was like, that's cool. And then I tried to do it again so I could demo it, and it only worked the first time. I'm sorry. But you could go there. So I got to Alibaba, which is also a progressive web app, and they're telling me that they have, I didn't click any buttons because I wanted to see if it sent me anything. You can all be really disappointed. But in theory, I should click this button and maybe they'll send me a message saying I signed up. Oh. Oh, do not disturb is on. No wonder. Okay. Did not get a notification. Well, I'll tell you what Alibaba uses push notifications for, because it's important. Like, we think of push notifications as being like nasty and like in our way, and we often turn them off, and that's cool. And according to the vendors, the browser vendors who allow you to use push notifications, you have to provide people the ability to turn them off. But if you get the messaging right, and you only give them like really important stuff, they're actually really useful. In the case of Alibaba, what they did is they send you push notifications if you leave stuff in your shopping cart. So you go shopping there, and you've put a bunch of stuff in your cart, and then you walk away. Well, they were able to like look at the people's carts and then send them a push notification that said like, "Hey, did you forget to buy this? Or like, was there a trouble? Did you have trouble signing out? Can we give you any help?" And they found that like doing that, they were able to capture like 70% of abandoned carts, which is crazy. That's a lot of stuff. You can read more about that on Google. I'll show you where that link is. Notifications, I talked about this. Syncing changes if you're offline and you're working, and then you get back online, syncing those changes. Also, like prefetching data. Maybe you've got like a single page app, and you know that like 90% of your users click that link next. Might as well just go like get all the data for that link, so when they click it, it just loads faster. So service workers and fetch. I messed it all up. My bin setup's really janky. So achievements unlocked here, like performance, reliability, and engagement. Last thing we can do is we can add an application manifest. So an app manifest, has anybody here made Chrome extensions? Yeah, so this is essentially the same thing as the Chrome extension manifest. It's very similar, it uses very similar syntax. And it allows you to like define like a set of metadata for your progressive web app. And that gives your progressive web app first-class status on a device. So coming back here, in the case of my portfolio page, I've got an app manifest that like defines all sorts of things, like a background color and all of this little like icons and different size icons. You can also, add it to your home screen. And what happens is you may have seen this in a few web pages, like where you sign on and you go to a web page and it says, "Hey, do you want to add this to your home screen?" And you thought like, "Oh, I don't know what that means," and you click no. Or maybe you're like, "Oh, that sounds cool," and you click yes. Well, it's essentially doing this. And if we go, forgive me if I mess this up. Here. I can't find it because the resolution's so small. I know. And I rehearsed this one too. I feel guilty. It's always awkward. Well, there is the ability to see in the Chrome Inspector the home screen. But since I can't figure out how to do that on this tiny, tiny little screen, I'll just show you here. Everybody can see this, right? Okay, I'm going to try this. There's a little icon with my face on it. Icon, and it brings up instantly the app, right, which is cool. The other cool thing is if you've got an Android and you open this little button and it shows you like all your apps in context as an actual application. It's not wrapped in a Chrome, like, oops, this blue Chrome, Google Chrome Maps and Google Chrome this. No, it's actually like a first-class citizen in here. So if you were to go to this page, you could add it to your home screen and see how that works. It's kind of neat. Yeah?
Can you register it to open specific URLs or specific protocols?
The app manifest, let's take a look. I have to see what is written. Miscellaneous. Oh, so this is where you specify what. So there may be the ability, so it gives you a start URL. So if you want to give somebody a different start URL, if that's your question, you could. So if maybe your application is served at something like /shell.html.
No, that's not exactly what I meant. Like, for example, let's take another native app, the Twitter app.
Okay.
On every app on your phone, if you click a Twitter link, it opens in the Twitter app.
Ah, I see what you're saying. Yes. So if I'm on the web and I click a link to say, I don't know, weather.com, will it open the progressive web app version or will it open the native app version?
Okay.
I understand the question completely. Anybody else familiar with this? Coming up at a conference as well, a couple conferences that I was at. And I remember that there wasn't, if I'm remembering correctly, there wasn't really consensus around it, but I don't know what the lack of consensus was. So I know that's the goal, at least as stated at Google, is like that's what they want. But I really don't know. It's a good question. And that speaks to a larger goal, right? Of can progressive web apps like replace a native app? Can we put them in a native app store? And there's some work being done to do that, but there's a lot of like business questions around that they're trying to figure out. We'll probably, yeah, we'll talk about that, I think, in Q&A time. This is not manifest. I don't have to demo it anymore. You all saw it. So app manifests, they get you full screen mode, you get icons. You can define different kinds of security policies and permissions in those app manifests, all sorts of different things. And like I said, you can add the app to your home screen and enable like a full screen mode. So achievements unlocked here, right? Engagement, it's more engaging because it feels like a native app. Okay, so like, why do this? A little bit of tech to do. It's interesting. Why do it at all? If we look at numbers for websites, right? 53% of users leave a website if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. So we're talking about like sub 1 second load times. We're talking about like instant load times in the case of a progressive web app, right? And they're going to be more reliable, more performant, more engaging, and more secure than just your plain old website. Versus native. Well, the return on investment, like when building native apps, is shrinking. So I just looked at these numbers a couple weeks ago. Since 2014, the cost to acquire a single customer has doubled. So how much it costs to get somebody to take out their phone, open up your store, wait for 50 megabytes of stuff to download, and then use it. Since then, I think, remembering off the top of my head, the number was about $6 at this point, depending on your app. So you charge $1.99 and you spent $6. That is not a particularly sustainable business model. In the store, get 80% of the downloads. And when you look at the top 20, it's a lot more than that. And this is interesting. That keeps going up, which is that 66% of mobile users download 0 apps a month. 2/3 of people don't ever download an app, or they download so few over the course that it's effectively 0%. Download 1 or 2 apps a month. And I should have a number in here for average engagement time for these apps. It's like under 10 minutes. So you have this huge spike. Like they download the app, they use it for like 5 minutes the first day, 2 minutes the second day, and then they never use it again. So how does a progressive web app like do better than that? Well, your progressive web app not being in the top 3 like apps in the App Store because it's in the web, it's on Google, it's in the biggest app store in the world, a search engine. Any search engine can get to your progressive web app. So that's pretty cool. You know, you don't have to worry about having different teams or sub-teams that are working on like your Android app or iOS app and what's the weird Chinese browser, UC2 or something like that. Like you can just have sort of like, you can just have like one team, sort of, as much as possible, one team building one app that works on the web, the whole web. So that's really big. And then you don't have to force people to download large apps. You don't have to worry about like downloads a month, right? Because you're going to get at least a few hits on a Google search engine. Who's doing this? Here's a few companies. I mentioned the Weather Channel. They've got a progressive web app. It does not work, as best I can tell, offline. Let's find out. Nope. But it does other things. They're doing push notifications for weather warnings and things like that. You all saw Pokédex. That was one. Let's see. The Washington Post has a progressive web app. Let me figure out exactly what it is they're doing with this. It doesn't work offline. They are doing some aggressive caching of assets, and they're like aggressively caching pages that you've loaded, which is very cool. The Guardian, progressive web app. Twitter has a progressive web app now. We talked about Alibaba and using a PWA to capture, recapture lost revenue in abandoned carts. Air Berlin has an interesting PWA that will notify you if your flight has been delayed or canceled. And they're not that hard to do, right? So it's possible that like this is a thing, that like progressive web apps are just kind of the next evolution of the web and of mobile, that essentially this is responsive design. And just like, I bet hardly anybody says to their clients, like, we are a responsive design firm. Now, we make all our sites responsive. Like, it's just a given that your site is responsive and it works on different size devices, and different power devices. Maybe in a few years, it's just going to be a given. Application is a progressive web app. You know? Granted, I hope, because it's very cool. It's up for people to pick at, but yeah. These are places to start. Google is all in on this, big time. Google and Microsoft and Mozilla are heavily invested in progressive web apps. Apple, not so much. I'm sure that question will come up if you want to contact me. And I should mention also that the company I work for, Upstatement, is hiring, and we do this kind of work. So come talk to me or other Upstatement employees. Amanda, who runs this meetup, also works there. Yeah, so does anybody have questions about this?
Yeah, we were talking about the possibility of progressive web apps replacing native apps and how there are business questions around that. Can you say a little more about that?
Sure. So this does not currently support service workers in iOS or in Safari. And it's a feature under consideration. They've got the Fetch API, which is a big step for them. They got that like 6 months ago. Talk about why Apple does this, right? Apple has a very profitable app store where they can sell you like $2.99 Candy Crush Saga apps or Pokédexes. I'm sure somebody has like a $5 Pokemon app in the Play Store, right? And so a free thing that's just on the web as a PWA is not necessarily in their business interests. So there's a lot of talk of like, how to make these in the interests of the browser vendors. Also has a Play Store, right, where they sell apps, but they're all in on this. It's interesting. Talk at Google of, according to somebody I spoke with a few months ago, of putting PWAs into the Google Play Store. Happen. So that's kind of like the challenge here, right? Is if once you say like my browser supports PWAs, you're saying I'm going to cannibalize all the revenue I get from my app store. there's also this other element of like, people don't know what add to home screen means. And it's, I think, kind of a silly way of, or dumb way of putting it. Like, does anybody know what add to home screen means if they go to a website? I told you, or like, yeah, right. But everybody knows what like, buy this app or download this app means. That's like a little more clear. And so there's a little bit about the verbiage. That's the what's that?
The really obvious way to fix this.
Yeah.
We make an app.
Yeah.
It's in the App Store. It costs $0.
Yeah.
It installs one HTML page, which installs a progressive web app, and you're done.
Yeah. I mean, I think that could be possible. The challenge there is the progressive web app is so tied to the browser. I don't know how technically that would work, because the browser has to visit your site for you to install the progressive web app.
On iOS,
Mhm.
regardless of what browser you think you're using the Safari engine.
Yes, and that's the problem
That's
there.
the one that doesn't
Mhm. So I don't believe Chrome, even on iOS, works with progressive web apps.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully soon. I mean, at this point, they are way behind the curve. I think Samsung just released their browser a few weeks ago. I believe it has service workers. That puts Apple technologically behind some artisanal Samsung browser.
Also, the Samsung browser is no longer tied to Samsung phones.
That's what I've heard. You can download it anywhere.
Download it on anything.
Yeah, it's very cool. A new like browser vendor in the world. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, yes, young fellow.
Is there a place where you can see the roadmap to the developers basically? Is there any like all of it?
Yeah, the roadmap for what?
Just for some of the features that are under consideration, or some of the things that you're thinking about building a progressive web app. Start.
Like browser features.
Those are some of the things, like business case for clients and things like that.
I think Awesome has some resources there, but you're kind of like in the Wild West, as far as I know, and it's like you go to can I use? You hear about some new browser API like, oh, I want to know about the like web, like the web authentication. So there's maybe a new web authentication API coming along, which will be cool. I want to learn about that, and it's like all I've got is blog posts and can I use, and I can go to can I use and see if there's any useful information there. So I don't know if there's any other roadmap apart from that. It's like the best place, unfortunately. Sorry. What's interesting though is that service workers are nothing new. They've been around for about 3 years now. Nothing. I'm a front-end programmer, so like 3 years is old to me. But they're not that new. And so like the roadmap for that kind of thing, like doing progressive web apps with service workers, was laid out years ago. So there's not too much more to do there, hopefully. Anybody else? I saw one over here. Yes.
How does caching play with critical path? Is it plug in, or you point out a lot of cache elements?
No. So are you thinking of like when the browser can only like make 6 requests at once? Yeah, so some of those complete. The cache should not interfere with that. You should be able to get all of those cache assets in parallel. So then if you're doing any kind of like critical load stuff, you could server push that. You could use HTTP to just push all that stuff out and not have to wait for that other round trip. It's interesting. This is like the Wild West a little bit right now. Like, we're just at the first level, or we're at the level of like the first set of abstractions for this. We've got like the first group of libraries stuff with caches and the service workers. And so I think there's going to be a lot of like generations of libraries that are going to have to come along that are going to improve it. So if you do it, you're like on the edge. 10 years from now, there'll be a better answer for that question. Yeah.
Will you share your slide
Yeah.
on GitHub or something?
No problem. I think I can just how?
Yeah.
I think we could share them
My
on.
slides that easy.
It is a markdown file. I don't know if anybody was paying attention to that. I guess you were. So it is a markdown file. We can share it on the meetup group, right?
Yeah, oh, we got
Yeah, I had planned for maybe doing like a little demo of how to build these. I'm not going to do that, I don't think. It's getting late. But I will say that there is, let's see if I can find it. Wish me luck. That's me. So I forked, Google has, whoops. Google has a something called Airhorn. It's like a little demo of how to build a progressive web app, but they've kind of let it go a bit. They've let the starting point for it go. So I made a fork of it and I just updated it. And it has like a very crude and basic like little workshop README that you could follow along to make a progressive web app. And what it does. You guys will, yeah, that's what it does. Horn. Oh, wait. I think it broke. So, yeah. What's cool is they show you how to take this from being like plain old like HTML JavaScript and make it work online or offline, and how to add an app manifest. So I'll share a link to my fork of this, and you can download it and see if it works for you as a way to learn. But Google has like a lot of resources for learning this. Yes?
Besides forgetting to expire like your portfolio content and after one, what are the other mistakes that people are doing?
One of the mistakes that would be easy to make, aside from old data, would probably be to try and cache too much. So there's a limit on how much information you can cache. And if you're caching a bunch of large assets and stuff, not only are you like, if you're prefetching a lot of assets, you're doing two things bad, potentially. One, you're saying like, hey, I think as a developer, I know what you want to do with your phone, and I want you to like just get 100 megabytes of images. And it's like, great, I have a 1 gig data plan. You just like knocked out 10% of my data for the month with just like a single page load. So we can do bad things by overly aggressively forcing people to download things they don't need. And again, that cache has a limit. So this is part 2 of that, which is there's a limit on how big those caches can be. And so they just start dropping things off the end, sort of like a first in, first out kind of situation. So they see like as that cache grows, it hits the limit, and then they're just going to start dropping things. But if you hit that limit a lot, there's going to be a performance problem. You're going to be forcing your people to download more stuff than their data plan. But most importantly, your cache will be useless because you'll be dropping off all the things that they really need in favor of like all this junk images, and like it'll never actually be useful because you'll never actually use anything that gets cached or gets thrown away. Off the top of my head, that's all I can think of. Anybody else see problems with this? Things is nothing new. People have been caching things for like 40 years. We're just like JavaScript kiddies, and we're like, oh, we get to do it now. And so we're going to make the same mistakes that everybody else has always made with this. So we can best learn from them. Anybody else? Any questions? Oh, one more.
Regarding the service workers and threading, wasn't there talk about web workers and threading, trying this? How's it going to change, like loading images and such?
Like JavaScript single-threaded. Web workers are very different than service workers. Web workers, my understanding, I don't know. I honestly, that was not this. I swear it was not this. I don't know enough about web workers really to speak with great authority to them. but they don't work in the background like service workers, is my understanding. And they have a very narrowly defined API where like they interact via messages, right? And you can send messages to them, and they can kind of do like quote unquote multi-threading with JavaScript. This service worker is completely different. It doesn't, excuse me. I've been drinking. I have a choice between beer and water, and guess which one I always choose. So service workers aren't interacting with your main JavaScript thread at all. They kind of like sit off on the side and do their own thing. So you can't send, as far as I can tell, maybe correct me, I don't think you could send messages back and forth and use a service worker like you can in like a web worker with doing multi-programming. But I don't know enough about web workers yet.
So yeah, web workers are
Yeah.
on a separate thread.
Right.
As you said, in the foreground.
Mhm.
So one use of them was audio, web audio API,
Yes.
thing which lets you
Yeah.
put stuff. So the rendering stuff, you don't know how much is going to happen in each render quantum
Mhm.
each. So you can actually get janky audio, which is very audible.
Yes.
You run out of processing power, right? Whereas if it's on a separate thread, it just gets on with
That
it.
makes sense, right?
So
Because
that's
JavaScript
cool.
is super
So
blocky.
if you need to reduce latency jack, that's when you would use a web
web worker. Cool. Very cool. Do you see any reason that they wouldn't? Any reason that that would interfere at all with the business of the service worker?
No, they're totally different use cases.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Does anybody have like any announcements for the community?
Come on up.
If you do, come up here.
So it can be events that you're hosting, maybe a job that other people would be interested in, or if you're looking.
Hello.
Wait for this
Season events. So not this month, but next month, we're going to be hosting the not quite second, but not quite third CodePen Boston meetup. Going to be spending some time working collaboratively on the new CSS grid implementation. It's here. It's wonderful. It's kind of great. So there's a meetup group, CodePen Boston. Sign up. Hopefully see them. Oh, the Cantina and the Fort Point Boston area down by South Station.
Nice. Thanks. Awesome.
Announcement. I didn't use Chris's computer though.
I work with this guy.
We work together, and we work at Upstatement, and we just turned 9 on Saturday, so we made a fun webpage that you can go to and get some birthday presents from us for our birthday. So Chris will load up the page so you know where to go, but it's upstatement.com/birthday. It's
Right.
not a progressive web app. So sorry.
Is it live?
Yeah, it's live. Very live. It's live.
It's still pretty fast.
You can just start the party.
How do I do it?
You click it.
And Yay.
But you can also sign up and get some fun stuff around the studio.
And we're hiring.
And we're hiring. We already said that. We're hiring. And engineers. And producers.
Nice.
Oh, where to go now?
Anyone else? I have one. We, as in Boston CSS, are looking for sponsors.